I give you a new commandment. Love each other. If I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you too must wash each other's feet. I have given you an example. Just as I have done, you also must do. This reading from John that we hear every year is one of John's most dense and theological section. Scholars call it Jesus' farewell discourse, or the farewell narrative. John has already been short on narrative through the story goes. There are vignettes of story, but there's lots of philosophical musing by the author about who Jesus is. We hear this on Christmas Day and on the first Sunday of Christmas. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. We get glimpses of that throughout John, but we hear stories from time to time, which we've heard through Lent. The raising of Nicodemus being one of them, of Lazarus, rather. Nicodemus is in John 3. Another story. And then we get to this section where Jesus is at table with his friends, and as he's at table with his friends in John's gospel, there is no take, eat, this is my body. There's just lots and lots of talking by Jesus about who he is and the ultimate scheme of God's salvation for humanity, and what his disciples, those who are with him at table, are supposed to do. We were gathered tonight, and we're using red and not white during Holy Week, beginning the Triduum, because the emphasis of today, Maundy Thursday, or Maundy, is Jesus' new commandment. Throughout John's gospel, Jesus has used misdirection and miscommunication to highlight what he's trying to teach. Tonight we hear that with Peter, as Jesus, their Lord and Master, takes off his robes and gets a towel and starts to wash their feet. But Peter, who's walked on water, who's been called Satan for rejecting Jesus' prophecies of crucifixion, of death, now doesn't understand the full point Okay. Bishop Topher. Okay. Peter doesn't understand the full point of why God has come into the world to be with us, to be among us, why the Word has become flesh and dwelt among us. It's to come and show us how to live this new commandment that Jesus gives. We hear tonight from John's Gospel a line that's in Eucharistic Prayer D that we'll hear on Saturday evening. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. In John's Gospel, what kicks off the organized plot to have Jesus killed is demonstrating victory over death and the grave. It's the raising of Lazarus. We don't fully hear that the way the lectionary breaks things up in a good thematic way. But Jesus has demonstrated that, and the empire cannot tolerate death not being a threat. So the empire cannot tolerate Jesus. who's with his disciples and loving them and not calling down angels, as we'll hear tomorrow, not defending himself, not weaponizing his deity or his followers, as we talked about in today's 1619 project group. There were no guns, germs, or steel used. There was no might making right. Jesus gives an example. This is how to do what I have come into the world to do. Love one another. Love them to the end. So tonight, as we break bread and Jesus is present with us, sharing a meal, as we gather around the altar in a few minutes to know Jesus' very flesh and blood in our hands, in our mouths, in our bodies, in our bellies. Jesus has loved us to the end, loved us as his own, and given us the example of serving one another. So we hear from Paul, his recounting to the church at Corinth, how when he was at table with his friends, Jesus took bread, blessed it, broke it, gave it to them, and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." We hear from John tonight, Jesus taking off his robes, tying a towel around himself, telling his disciples, "This I have done, this you must do." So we'll sit for a minute or so. We'll wonder about where we're called to service. We'll reflect on ways we are serving. And then I'll invite you to follow Jesus' example with me of washing one another's feet. As I have done, this you must do. A new commandment I give to you. Love one another. Amen.